Imagine waking up on, like, a storm-swept Pacific beach.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right, and you have absolutely no memory of how you got there. The sand is freezing, the air smells like ozone and impending rain, and there's just this massive splintered shipwreck scattered across the shoreline.
Sounds incredibly intense.
It is. And as you blink the salt out of your eyes and, you look at the other survivors pulling themselves from the wreckage, this slow, terrifying realization creeps in.
Because they aren't random strangers.
Exactly, you recognize them, but you really shouldn't. Because standing right in front of you are three of the most famous, deeply tragic characters in literary history.
It creates this immediate visceral disorientation. I mean,
Yeah.
you are physically trapped in this incredibly harsh, unforgiving environment, right?
Yeah.
But psychologically, you're trapped inside the minds of people whose pain has been documented and studied for centuries.
Which is just such a crazy concept. So we're pulling our source material today from a fascinating post on a blogger site.
The blog is called Plays and Philosophy.
Yeah, and it's dated April 27, 2026. The post features this brilliant one-act play by playwright Farid Novin called The Island of Reckoning.
Alongside Novin's personal, incredibly detailed playwright's notes.
Which really add a whole new layer to it.
They absolutely do. So our focus for this deep dive is to explore the central mechanism of Novin's play. We're looking at what actually happens when you strip iconic characters of the authors who created them.
Like taking away the puppet master.
Exactly. You remove the plot lines they were forced to follow, and you make them confront their own unresolved trauma. And I think it's important to note, this goes far beyond just literary criticism.
Right?
It functions as a mirror for how you process your own suffering, how much agency you actually have, and, well, how you deal with the narratives the world forces onto you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the physical setting is brilliant. It forces immediate action. We have Shylock from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice,
Right.
Jean Valjean from Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, and Tolstoy's Anna Karenina.
That is a heavy group.
Seriously heavy. And they are surrounded by splintered wood, heavy waterlogged books with unreadable titles, and this Pacific storm that is visibly darkening the sky.
And Novin uses that immediate threat of the storm to expose the actual mechanics of trauma.
How so?
Well, think about it. When people are stripped of their normal societal context and placed under extreme stress, they don't just, invent new survival strategies on the spot.
No, of course not.
Right, the default to their core wounds. It is entirely instinctual muscle memory.
Oh, wow. Yeah, let's look at what they're actually doing with their bodies, because Valjean is methodically, silently building a fire.
He's organizing rocks and damp wood.
Exactly. He is operating entirely on the muscle memory of a man who spent 19 years in a brutal, freezing prison in Toulon for stealing a single loaf of bread.
He knows how to survive the cold because the cold is basically in his bones.
Yeah. But then look at Anna Karenina. She is completely detached from the physical survival effort.
Right, she's just sitting on a massive driftwood log.
Staring out at the violent ocean, but she isn't even seeing the water. She is caught in this total dissociative loop.
She remembers the cold iron tracks of the Moscow train station.
Yes, the smell of the smoke, the terrifying mechanical speed of the approaching train. She's actually verbally wondering if she's even alive.
Which is such a haunting detail. She notes that there are no drawing rooms on this beach, no society gossips watching her.
No rigid structures to dictate how her story is supposed to end.
Right.
But I keep getting stuck on Shylock's physical response because it just feels the most volatile to me.
Oh, definitely.
He salvaged a bone-handled knife from the wreckage, and he is just pacing the beach. Like, for an hour, he paces back and forth, clutching this knife.
Muttering about the systematic humiliation, the stripping of his wealth.
The forced conversion he endured in the Venetian court, all of it. But here's the thing. He isn't using the knife to cut wood or rope, so what is he actually projecting onto that object?
Well, when Anna finally breaks her silence to ask him why he's holding it, Shylock delivers this profoundly unsettling answer.
Right.
He admits that when he pulled the knife from the sand, he didn't know if he would need it to defend himself against the island,
Or if he would use it on himself.
Exactly.
Which just shifts the entire energy of the beach.
Completely. And Valjean recognizes the psychology of that instantly. He tells Shylock about the yellow passport he carried after his release from prison.
Oh, right. Because in 19th century France, a yellow passport permanently marked you as a former convict.
Exactly. It guaranteed you would be turned away from inns, denied honest work, and just treated as a complete pariah.
But Valjean kept that passport long after he could have thrown it away or burned it.
Yeah, he kept it as a weapon he held against his own throat. It
Wow.
was his way of ensuring he never forgot the verdict society placed on him. It was a way of internalizing the state's punishment so the state didn't even have to do it anymore,
He calls it the past's way of remaining the present.
which is such a brutal way of describing it.
It really is. It's like how we do the work of our own abusers. We carry the yellow passport for them.
And if we look in the playwright's notes, Novin actually points out that Shylock's knife functions as the exact boundary line where abstract philosophy collides with physical reality.
Like rubber meeting the road.
Right. You can debate justice and trauma all day in a classroom, but philosophy changes its chemical makeup the moment you are actually holding something sharp in your hand.
And you have to make a physical decision about what to cut.
Exactly.
The storm doesn't care about their trauma, though. The sky turns this bruised purple, the wind starts howling, and because they are forced to share the limited heat of Valjean's fire, their survival tactics inevitably, violently collide.
Yeah, they are locked in an ideological pressure cooker, and their worldviews are built on fundamentally incompatible premises.
So Valjean operates entirely on this concept he calls responsibility. He argues that truth without compassion becomes cruelty.
Right, because he lived through a system that was technically legally correct in punishing theft.
But because that system lacked compassion, it just functioned as a meat grinder for human souls. So he firmly believes that no matter how deep your wounds are, you are ultimately responsible for choosing who you become in the aftermath.
But Shylock rejects that premise entirely. He counters with the inverse. He says compassion without truth becomes hypocrisy.
That is such a powerful line.
It really is. Shylock refuses to accept the conditional, transactional amnesty offered by the powerful. He actually dissects the mechanics of how societal mercy really works.
Right, the ruling class ruins you, strips you of your dignity, and then demands that you perform profound gratitude for whatever scraps of life they let you keep.
And they call that transaction mercy. But Shylock argues it is nothing more than the aesthetics of power. It's a performance designed to make the abusers feel benevolent.
And he doesn't want their aesthetic mercy. He wants the reality of his injury legally and morally acknowledged.
Then Anna steps in and just dismantles both of their arguments.
Oh yeah, she completely wrecks them.
She points out that Valjean and Shylock are basically arguing about how to arrange the furniture inside a locked room.
Right, because Valjean talks about the freedom to choose who you are, but Anna asks, well, how free can a choice possibly be when society is the architect of the choices available to you?
Exactly. She chose passion and intellectual freedom inside a 19th century Russian aristocracy that was specifically engineered to crush women who made that choice.
The system built the walls, locked the door, and set the building on fire.
Right. She is highlighting the severe limitations of individual moral responsibility when the systemic game is rigged from the very start. Like, you can't just choose your way out of a structural trap.
Hold on, I need to interrupt here because Valjean's philosophy, it genuinely bothers me in this context.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it is incredibly easy for Valjean to preach about choosing who you are when he had a literal bishop step into his life, hand him expensive silver, and offer him complete unearned grace.
That's a fair point.
Right. That bishop treated Valjean as a human being before Valjean had done anything to earn it. And that systemic intervention gave him the financial and spiritual capital to transform. But Shylock and Anna had no bishop.
No, I didn't.
They faced courts, train tracks, and complete systemic destruction. So isn't Valjean's philosophy just like a luxury of the lucky?
Well, what's fascinating here is how Novin anticipates exactly that objection. And he uses it to apply extreme dramatic pressure.
Okay, how so?
Valjean doesn't dismiss Anne and Shylock. He doesn't offer hollow platitudes. He actually absorbs the reality of their starvation. He agrees that a starving man doesn't make a free philosophical choice to steal bread. He steals because his biology demands it.
So he actually acknowledges the rigged system.
He validates the anger instead of telling them to calm down. But Valjean draws a hard line.
What's the line?
He insists that while we are heavily shaped by our circumstances, there's a core element within the human consciousness that persists, like a stubborn refusal to become only the sum of our circumstances.
Oh.
And his answer to the fact that Shylock and Anna lacked a bishop in their lives is basically the philosophical anchor of the play.
What does he tell them?
He tells them that because they were given zero grace in their past lives, what they owe to each other right now, with a freezing storm bearing down on them, is to be each other's grace.
Wow. To become the intervention the world denied them.
Exactly.
And it's wild because just after he says that, a massive gust of wind nearly blows out their fire. And without a word, all three of them throw themselves over the flames using their bodies as a windbreak.
It is this incredibly powerful transition where the philosophy becomes a physical action.
They actually keep each other warm.
Yeah, and that shared physical vulnerability cracks open a whole new level of self-awareness. It shifts them away from arguing about their pasts and forces them to analyze the architecture of their pasts.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, yes.
Because they start dissecting the rigged game of their societies, right? And they stumble into this massive meta-theatrical realization about who actually built the game.
They discover the existence of their authors.
Yes, they realize they are inventions of men. William Shakespeare, Victor Hugo, Leo Tolstoy, men who engineered this immense, suffocating suffering specifically to make artistic or philosophical points.
And the precision with which they dissect their creators is just stunning. I mean, Shylock recognizes that Shakespeare gave him incredible, enduring eloquence,
Right, he gave him the half-not-a-Jew eyes speech.
which humanized him to audiences for centuries. But Shylock realizes that eloquence was actually a trap.
Shakespeare allowed him to articulate his humanity flawlessly, only to have the Venetian court completely overrule him anyway.
Exactly, and Shylock questions if Shakespeare actually sympathized with him, or if the author just, enjoyed the dramatic paradox of a brilliant mind being legally crushed.
Wow. And then Valjean turns his focus to Victor Hugo, and he uses this brilliant architectural metaphor. He says Hugo built him a cathedral. It's a massive, awe-inspiring structure, but it is fundamentally made of cold stone. Valjean realizes that Hugo understood the grand architecture of compassion from an intellectual standpoint, but Hugo didn't understand the interior, day-to-day reality of living with that trauma.
Because Hugo was a wealthy man, describing a suffering he had rigorously analyzed, but never actually endured himself.
Exactly. But Anna's critique of Tolstoy is, well, it's arguably the most devastating.
Well, without a doubt. She understands that Tolstoy breathed incredible life into her. He gave her piercing intelligence, deep emotional desire, and profound moral seriousness.
But she realizes that Tolstoy, as a man of his era, couldn't actually forgive her for possessing all three of those traits at once.
Right, society couldn't tolerate a woman with that much internal power, and Tolstoy ultimately sided with society.
She notes that he orchestrated her death under the train with breathtaking artistry. But that artistry was born out of his own deep discomfort with the magnificent, flawed woman he had brought into existence.
She summarizes it perfectly by saying, "It is a peculiar thing to be destroyed by someone who admired you."
Oof, that line just hits so hard.
It really does.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, particularly Noven's playwright notes, this is the functional genius of the beach setting.
Right, because there's no narrator.
Exactly. Noven points out that in the Island of Reckoning, there is no omniscient voice telling the audience how to feel. By removing the authors, Noven removes the thumb on the scale.
And the characters realize that because their original stories ended based on their authors' agendas rather than their own psychological resolutions, they are, in Shylock's words, unfinished arguments.
The island is basically the purgatory, where unfinished arguments go to realize they cannot be resolved by the people who started them.
Have you, listening right now, ever felt like your narrative was being authored by someone else?
It's a very relatable feeling.
It is. Maybe it's a family structure dictating what success looks like for you, or a corporate hierarchy defining your worth. Or maybe, like Anna, you've dealt with people who genuinely admired your talents, but still systematically boxed you in or set you up to fail because your full potential threatened them.
Recognizing that lack of agency is terrifying. But the play doesn't let them wallow in that realization.
No, it forces the issue.
Right. Just as they understand their unfinished arguments, the storm hits its absolute peak. The rain is horizontal, and out on the dark ocean, a faint light appears.
A ship's lantern, it's an external deadline.
Noven writes that the approaching ship is the closest thing to a narrator the play possesses. It is a completely indifferent external force. It doesn't care about Tolstoy or Shakespeare.
It just forces a timeline.
Yes. They have to decide, immediately, what to do with the tiny sliver of agency they have left.
Which forces the climax of the play. And it isn't a battle against the wind, it is a psychological battle for forgiveness.
Valjean turns to Shylock, but he completely subverts Shylock's expectations.
He doesn't ask Shylock to forgive Antonio, or the Venetian court, or the people who stole his daughter. He asks Shylock if he is capable of forgiving himself.
He asks him to forgive himself for the terrible compromises survival demanded.
Exactly. He asks if Shylock can forgive himself for letting his righteous, justified rage become such a constant, necessary armor that it eventually rusted to his skin and morphed into his entire identity.
Which completely short-circuits Shylock's defenses.
Right, because Shylock was armed and ready to defend his anger against anyone demanding he be gracious. He had his philosophical arguments prepared.
But Valjean bypasses the external grievance entirely and targets the internal rot.
It makes me think of someone who spends 20 years fighting a grueling, all-consuming legal battle over a stolen business or a ruined reputation. You pour your entire life force into proving you were wronged.
And you were wronged.
The injustice is objectively real. But when the gavel finally falls, even if you win, you walk out of the courthouse and realize you have absolutely no idea who you are without the lawsuit.
The fight became your personality.
Exactly. The rage was the only thing keeping the engine running. Valjean is asking Shylock to drop the lawsuit against the universe.
That captures the mechanism perfectly. Dropping the grievance feels like losing your identity. And Anna steps into this silence with a line that defines the core philosophy of the scene.
What does she say?
She says that self-forgiveness is the only debt whose creditor cannot be escaped.
Wow.
Because in the court of self-forgiveness, you are the judge, the defendant, and the plaintiff. You're always present for the negotiation.
You cannot adjourn the court, and you cannot hire a representative.
Right. You have to face the ledger yourself.
It requires a fundamental internal reorganization before any external progress can be made.
And Noven immediately translates that internal reorganization back into physical action. Because the ship's light is too faint to see them. They need a massive signal fire.
So they realize they have to hoist a massive waterlogged wooden mast from the shipwreck and heave it directly into the center of their fire.
It requires the combined physical strength of all three of them. It is not a graceful, poetic moment at all.
It's brutal.
Yeah, it's exhausting, awkward labor in the middle of a screaming storm. They slip in the wet sand, their hands bleed, but they stop debating the nature of justice.
They bypass all the cerebral negotiations and unite in this singular physical effort, thrusting the timber into the flames and creating a roaring, undeniable pillar of light.
They literally build a beacon out of their own wreckage.
Which brings us to the resolution. The mast catches fire, the storm finally exhausts itself and begins to break. The freezing rain stops, the stars pierce through the cloud cover, and the light of the ship is clearly moving toward the shore. They are going to be seen.
But the reality of rescue forces one final practical question.
Right.
Shylock looks at the ship and asks, if the rescue boat only has room for one or two of us, who gets to go?
It's the ultimate scarcity mindset kicking back in, the reflex of the survivor.
But Anna dismantles it effortlessly. She looks at the approaching light and calmly states that she isn't getting on the boat because she is already dead.
She explains, I am what is left after the story ends and before the verdict is recorded.
She realizes the island wasn't a trap. It was a sanctuary. It was a space that allowed them to articulate the truths their author suppressed.
And having finally spoken her truth, she feels complete regardless of what the ship represents.
And Shylock experiences a parallel breakthrough. He watches the ship and realizes he has zero desire to return to Venice.
He doesn't want to go back to the courtroom, the ledgers, or the life defined by the verdict passed against him.
Right. He drops the bone-handled knife in the sand and says, if there is a boat and it carries me somewhere, it will not carry me somewhere better than what I understood tonight.
And Valjean, who never loses that deep pragmatic hope, tells him, you don't have to go back to Venice. You only have to go forward.
And when Shylock asks where forward is, Valjean honestly admits he doesn't know.
Because the authors didn't write a destination for them beyond the tragedies?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Valjean fundamentally believes the forward motion exists.
So, what does this all mean for you navigating your own unresolved narratives?
Well, I think the core insight lies in Anna's final realization about how we relate to our own minds. She suggests that if we cannot escape the history of our own trauma, then perhaps the goal isn't escape. Perhaps the goal is habitation.
Habitation instead of escape.
Learning to live inside oneself as though it were a house one had chosen, rather than a prison one was assigned.
Because when you view your mind as a prison, your only goal is to break out, which is impossible.
Right. But if you accept it as a house, even a damaged one, you take ownership of it. And Shylock completes the thought by adding, a house one is still furnishing.
You can move the furniture, you can patch the roof.
Exactly. And Valjean concludes by pointing out that the human soul builds itself through what it refuses to become, just as much as through what it actively chooses to be.
Our refusals are powerful acts of authorship. Shylock's refusal to pretend the system was fair was a way of writing his own dignity.
Anna's refusal to suppress her passion was a way of writing her own humanity.
They took back the pen, even if the original manuscripts burned.
But this raises an important question about how we handle ambiguity,
Right.
because Noven's playwright notes, at the very end of the text, address Anna's ultimate status.
Like, is she a ghost? Is she physically alive?
Right. Did the train happen, or was this just a hallucination seconds before impact?
But Navin deliberately refuses to answer. He writes that the play does not enforce a single interpretation, because living authentically in a state of not knowing is the actual theme of the work. The ambiguity isn't a mistake, it is the point.
We spend so much energy demanding absolute certainty about our futures before we allow ourselves to feel secure.
I want to leave you with that thought. In your own life, when you find yourself standing on that storm-swept beach, when you are in the agonizing waiting period for a medical test result or a career decision or a final verdict on a relationship, can you stop demanding to know exactly how the author intends to end your story? Can you let go of the need for a tidy, guaranteed resolution and instead focus purely on the present? Stand with the people beside you, gather the wreckage you have, and just focus on keeping your fire burning in the dark.